Hi guys, it's me, ChazzaHD, and welcome tonight to this qualifying preview for this weekend's 2023 Singapore Grand Prix. Hope you guys are doing well. Of course, today we've had Friday practice, and now we'll be going through the data from today. Really, the data from only one session, because obviously practice 2 a lot more, in terms of what happened in that session, a lot more valuable that session than practice 1, given that practice 2, of course, takes place in obviously complete darkness because you have street lights and everything, but yeah, it takes place at night, and practice 1 takes place in the latter part of the day, so the conditions aren't, of course, really close to what we're going to get for real when we actually have qualifying tomorrow afternoon here in the UK, and obviously tomorrow evening in Singapore. So yeah, that's what obviously we're going to be going through tonight. We'll be going through the sector time data from practice just to see where certain teams are quick, where certain teams are not. And also, I'll get into my final qualifying predictions. We'll get into car upgrades, and there are plenty of car upgrades for this weekend. McLaren especially have brought a gigantic upgrade. 9 different parts in total. I think 8 of the 9 are performance upgrades. But yeah, it is incredible how much they've brought. But also we've got, I think, AlphaTauri have got a big upgrade. Alpine to a degree, Red Bull, and others as well. So yeah, we'll be getting into that, of course, in this stream as well. Just wanted to say, of course, as usual, hope you guys are doing well no matter what time zone you're in or what part of the world you're from, and what in general you are going through in your part of the world. And I hope you will join me in previewing tonight qualifying Singapore taking place tomorrow. Make sure to let me know in the chat, of course, how you think qualifying will go tomorrow. Your predictions for, say, the top 5, top 3. Of course, there's a poll running at the top of the live chat, where after a really surprise and stunning practice day today for the Ferrari team, I have asked in that poll, will Ferrari take pole position for the 2023 Singapore Grand Prix? Let me know, yes or no. I'll get onto my thoughts as to that in a bit. But yeah, of course, during the stream, make sure to let me know your thoughts going into qualifying tomorrow, which should be definitely the highlight of the weekend. Of course, Singapore not exactly known for tons of overtaking or stuff like that. So let's now get into the data from practice 2 and get into properly previewing qualifying for the Singapore Grand Prix. And of course, we'll start off with the results of practice 2. And yeah, very surprisingly, Ferrari got a 1-2, not just in practice 2, but in practice 1 as well. When I saw the practice 1 results, I just assumed it was, just a typical practice 1 where you can't really take that much from it in terms of importance. But to be this quick again in practice 2 is really impressive. I mean, I said in my weekend preview that I didn't think that Ferrari would be even able to get into the top 5 in or on single lap pace this weekend. But yeah, first and second, both drivers looking super quick and very competitive, which is great to see, just as they were a couple of weeks ago at Monza. And as we'll get into in a moment with the sector time data, their pace in all of the sectors is just really strong. They're not, particularly strong in one sector, which is making them look a bit better than maybe they are overall for the entire lap. So yeah, Ferrari, at the minute, they look like they've got the best overall car so far this weekend, at least when it comes to qualifying pace. Then you've got George Russell in 3rd place in the Mercedes. Mercedes look a bit better than I expected, compared to, say, Red Bull, of course, and even compared to McLaren, despite the mass amounts of upgrades that McLaren have brought. So, yeah, Mercedes also looking a bit better which is, of course, good to see. That's what we want to see. Ferrari, Mercedes especially, getting closer to Red Bull and just being better in general than we've seen in 2023. Because in 2023, let's be honest, they've been pretty disappointing. Fernando Alonso just behind in fourth. His pace is okay relative to the cars around him, I would say. Lewis Hamilton in fifth, nearly a quarter of a second slower than his teammate, which I'm very much surprised by because we know this circuit is one that Lewis Hamilton absolutely loves. Lando Norris then in sixth place. Now, I am a bit perplexed at that because, again, they've brought so many upgrades, which we will show in a bit. But so far, we haven't seen any performance gain from it. Now, maybe it's because they weren't really pushing as hard as maybe they could, and they were more so just trying to understand how the car now feels with these new upgrades. But these upgrades that they've brought were targeted at improving their speed in the slow corners or slower corners, as we'll get to in a moment. With the sector time data, that's not really showing up so far. So, yeah, not great. And another thing to mention with McLaren, this weekend, Lando Norris is the only one who has the upgrade. Oscar Piastri is still running the car that they basically had at the last Grand Prix at Monza, just with, higher downforce wings. So just need to clarify that if you do notice a massive difference in lap time between Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri this weekend. And then Sergio Perez 7th, Max Verstappen 8th. Now you may be thinking, surely they're massively sandbagging and secretly they do have the strongest pace out there. Now, I do believe, without a doubt, that they are sandbagging to a degree. I don't think they're, pushing as hard or being as aggressive with, say, their fuel loads, engine modes so far as, say, other teams have been. But I don't think they legitimately right now have, at least, again, when it comes to pace over a single lap, I don't think right now they've got the best car. I think that title belongs to Ferrari. I think the Scuderia, I think they've got the quickest car over a single lap right now. And Red Bull, even though I do expect improvement, on Saturday, once they push hard. I mean, we know from looking at practice results this season, especially Friday practice, that Red Bull do tend to not show as much of their hand as they do when you really have to in qualifying. But they did have quite big handling issues, which was a big reason, really, why they ended up not just in 7th and 8th, but 0.7 of a second slower than Ferrari in practice. And the issue was very bad rear stability, and well, it wasn't really stable at all. Sergio Perez was complaining that he thought he was going to crash all of the time because of how unstable the rear was, and it really affected them coming out of the slower corners, I think. And it did actually, I think, in one of the corners in the first sector, I think, was affecting them as well. So there is quite a bit of work to do at Red Bull if they're going to get pole position, because this Friday practice day they've had is, I think, by far the worst Friday practice they've had in probably 2-3 years or something like that. It's kind of reminiscent, these issues they're having, to the 2020 Red Bull. If you remember back then, at the very early stages of that 2020 season, their car was really unstable on the rear end, and it caused obviously a massive loss in performance. Eventually they got on top of it. Let's hope all well. Red Bull, from their perspective, they'll be hoping that they can get on top of that over the night and make some setup changes to try and fix that. And then you've got Kevin Magnussen in 9th and Valtteri Bottas in 10th. Magnussen, we know when qualifying comes around, he's going to sadly fail to deliver again, because that's all he's done really in 2023 when it comes to qualifying. And for Valtteri Bottas, good to see him in there, but I don't think Alfa Romeo will be in the top 10 on Saturday qualifying. And then for the rest of the order, you got Hulkenberg in 11th, Liam Lawson in P12, 0.2 of a second, pretty much quicker than Yuki Tsunoda. Remember, Liam Lawson has never raced around this circuit before. Of course, Tsunoda raced here last year and had a pretty decent race up until a DNF that he had. Can't remember the exact reason for Tsunoda's DNF, but yeah, to come here and immediately be quicker is seriously impressive from Lawson. If he was to end up qualifying around where he was in practice too, that would be, I think, one of the real star performances of qualifying. So we'll see whether he can replicate that once again. Esteban Ocon 13th, Alpine not looking too smart at the moment. Yeah, they brought a couple upgrades, but they're not really showing any performance gains so far. We'll have to see in qualifying whether maybe they have a lot more in the tank to show. Let's hope they do. Lance Stroll in 14th. No surprise. Miles off the pace of his teammate, having a hopeless 2023. Oscar Piastri 15th. Again, he doesn't have the upgrades that Lando does. So we do have to, account for that to a degree. I think he should still be getting closer on lap time to Lando, despite the difference in upgrades. But yeah, we do have to account for that, and also account for with Piastri. He's never raced around this track before, so this is going to be quite an experience for Oscar, because obviously this Grand Prix, as an event, is a very tough one for the drivers physically, mentally, and obviously the track, driving the track itself, and keeping it out of the barriers is pretty tricky as well. And then you've got Tsunoda 16th, Zhou 17th, Gasly 18th, and surprisingly far off his teammate. Maybe one of the drivers was running the new upgrades and one wasn't. I'll have to see about that later. And then in the last two positions, you've got the two Williamses, Logan Sargent and Alexander Albon. Don't know exactly what Alexander Albon's issue in practice was, but he definitely did have an issue because he only did, I think, 5 laps in practice too. And his best lap time, I think, was on the medium compound tyre. So he definitely could do a lot better on, with his pace. Obviously, if he especially ran a soft compound tyre. Logan Sargent, very far off the pace. Yeah, for him to be, 0.8 of a second, pretty much slower than Zhou in the Alfa Romeo, when I think in reality the Williams and Alfa Romeo cars are pretty similar on pace this weekend from what I've seen. That's quite embarrassing. So yeah, Logan is going to have, I think, a shocker of a weekend. But there you go. Those are results of practice too. Get into the sector time data. So, first sector, you've got some important corners, of course. You've got a couple medium speed corners and a couple slow corners. But really, in the first sector, because you've got 2 DRS zones, it is more so about your high speed performance, and no surprise, Ferrari looking quick through there, 0.5 tenth quicker than McLaren, whose pace through the first sector is pretty good. Aston Martin's pace as well, pretty good. Mercedes, I think their pace is fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with their pace in the first sector. It could be better, no doubt about it, but I don't think it's way off what they should be doing in the first sector. And then after that, you've got the Haas of Hulkenberg, the Alfa Romeo of Zhou. No surprise in terms of their lap time difference to the teams ahead of them. And then you've got the 7th best team in the first sector, Red Bull, 0.3 of a second off Ferrari. Now, again, part of it is the handling imbalances they were having during practice, but I think, given the nature of the first sector especially, I think this data does confirm that they definitely have a bit more to show than, say, what Ferrari have shown us so far. That's not to say Ferrari are showing absolutely everything they've got, so far in practice, but I think Red Bull definitely have got more pace in this first sector. I'd be very surprised if they're 1/3 of a second slower in the first sector in qualifying, and I'd expect them to be really at least quarter of a second quicker in this first sector compared to Ferrari. Or not quarter of a second quicker than Ferrari, but just quarter of a second closer than they were in this first sector from practice 2, if that makes sense. So yeah, Red Bull, definitely. They've got more to show, especially in this sector. Then you got Williams in 8th. Again, though, Logan Sargent, he did the best sectors for Williams, so we don't really know for sure how quick the Williams really is. And then you've got Alpine in 9th, and then AlphaTauri in 10th. You'll see a common theme with Alpine, very slow, really, through all of the sectors. But the middle sector, in my view, is the most important sector at this track because it's got so many important corners, and this track, we know, is full of slow corners, and, of course, the strong majority of them are in the middle sector. So, Ferrari, once again, and very surprisingly, looking so strong in the middle sector. They were just about the best team. Them and Mercedes, though, doing the same pace, which is good to see from Mercedes that they're right up there. Then, yeah, Red Bull, 10th and a half down on Ferrari. That, I don't think, is down to them running more fuel or anything like that. I think that is genuinely, from practice too, I think that's genuinely because of the issues Red Bull were having with the rear end of their car. And if that continues and they're losing this amount of time to Ferrari in the middle sector, that will cost them in qualifying. It absolutely will. So they've got to get on top of that. Aston Martin, they probably could be quicker in this middle sector by, I don't know, 10th, maybe 10th and a half. So, yeah, I think it'd be nice to see a bit more from that Aston Martin in the middle sector, and especially with the McLaren. It would be nice to see a bit more from them in this sector. I have no idea why they're so slow in the middle sector. And as I said a moment ago, McLaren's upgrades were aimed at improving their performance in the slow corners. The middle sector is full of slow corners, and they are quite far off in pace. So, from what we've seen so far, there is not really enough evidence to suggest that their car has actually improved with these upgrades. We'll see ultimately, of course, in qualifying and the race. But yeah, this is the main part of the track that McLaren, in terms of lap time, need to work on. They should be in this sector, not necessarily the quickest team, but they shouldn't be that much, I'd say, slower than Mercedes. I think really they need to be at least 0.3 of a second quicker than they were here. And if they were 0.3 of a second quicker, then instead of Lando Norris ending up in 6th place in practice 2, probably would have been in 3rd, which would still be good and would see McLaren in a good, competitive position going forward for the rest of the weekend, especially into qualifying, which of course around this track is so important. So yeah, a lot of work there to do for McLaren. AlphaTauri, their pace looking good through the middle sector, just ahead of Alfa Romeo. Haas's pace not really a surprise. Alpine, though, I have no idea why they're so slow in this middle sector. I mean, compared to Aston Martin, 3.5 of a second. Now, the Aston Martin is better than the Alpine, but in this type of sector, around this type of track, I wouldn't have expected it to be that big of a gap. So, yeah, Alpine are definitely not performing well so far. And, they're not living up to, not necessarily the hype, but they're not living up to what I thought they would do this weekend, which is probably sneak into the top 10. Then Williams, at the very back, but of course, that was Sargent who did that time. Who knows what Albon could have done. To be honest, I imagine Albon probably could have put himself around Bottas and Hülkenberg in that middle sector. And then the final sector, which is now that they've changed the layout of the final sector and made it a lot better in terms of ability to follow a car ahead and overtake for the race, made the final sector not quite as intriguing as it used to be when it came to qualifying, because the final sector now You've got a 90-degree right-hander at the end of the final DRS zone on the circuit. And then you're flat out into a chicane. Quite a, not a slow chicane, but a chicane nonetheless. And then you fly into the final couple corners, and then that's the lap done. It's quite a simple final sector now, and it is a lot higher speed. And of course, that is suiting, as you can see, Ferrari quite a bit this weekend. They were just over a tenth of a second quicker than the next best team in that final sector. And I think that's really, not only is there really surprisingly good pace in the middle sector helping their performance, but that final sector, having the alterations it's had, which I believe is only for this year, is really helping their cause this weekend. So great to see from Ferrari. They definitely have, in my view, the quickest car for qualifying going into obviously qualifying coming up very soon. So yeah, Ferrari I think have got the best car. Whether they get pole position or not is another story. Aston Martin, their pace in the final sector I'd say is very good. Can't really ask for more from them through there. Mercedes' pace is good. McLaren's is decent, I would say. And then Red Bull, quarter of a second down on Ferrari. And once again, in a higher speed sector, I think we can see an element of Red Bull not quite pushing as hard as maybe they could. So I'd expect Red Bull to probably be a tenth and a half better at least in this final sector. So overall, once you eliminate, them maybe not pushing as hard with certain engine mode or maybe running a bit more fuel, say, I think Red Bull, even with the the rear instability that they have had so far this weekend, I still think they can go, compared to everybody else, probably another 4.5, 5 tenths of a second at most quicker than they've gone so far. So Red Bull, they're still obviously big contenders. They're not going to have, a weekend similar to Mercedes had back here in Singapore 8 years ago in 2015, where they were miles off the pace. I don't think it's going to be anything quite like that. And then the final 4 teams, you've got AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo, Alpine once again, not quick, and then Williams massively at the back in this final sector. So ultimately, yeah, Ferrari, they've got the quickest qualifying car here. I think that's pretty clear to see if I go back to this top 10 results. So just before we get into my predictions for qualifying, let me just quickly touch on what I think the pecking order is going into qualifying tomorrow. So Ferrari, I think, are quickest. I think Red Bull will be at least second best. Again, even if they've still got issues with the rear end of their car, I still think they'll be the second best team at worst. I don't see them, fifth on the grid at best or anything like that. That would be crazy if that was to happen. And then I've gone Mercedes third. I'm pretty confident in that they've got the third best car. Aston Martin fourth, and McLaren, unfortunately, in fifth. If McLaren can maybe show a bit more from these upgrades tomorrow, not tomorrow, but, show a bit more from these upgrades, just in general, and we can see what their true pace is with all of these new parts, then maybe they'll be a bit better than, only the fifth best team. But from what I've seen so far, I believe they are the fifth best team in qualifying trim this weekend. And then after that, I've got sixth best team in qualifying trim being Haas, then Alfa Romeo, and then it's hard to say with Williams, AlphaTauri, and Alpine exactly who is in what position, but I'd probably lean towards Williams having, say, the 8th best car, and then probably AlphaTauri or Alpine having the slowest car. I mean, Alpine having the slowest car here as well as Monza would be just incredibly poor and crazy, really, considering that, 3 weeks ago they were on the podium. And they deserve to be on the podium, and they were genuinely quite quick. But yeah, that's how I see things so far, especially after the only practice session of the weekend that is really, the most relevant, with the conditions we get in practice being very similar to what we get in qualifying. So given my thoughts on that, let's now get into my final predictions going into qualifying. So, instead of going for what I went with in my weekend preview, which was a Lando Norris pole position, I am going for a Ferrari front row lockout. Carlos Sainz, I'm going on pole position for the second race in a row. He's in great form, Carlos, and he has always been very quick here, and I think he will take pole position qualifying. Charles Leclerc will be just behind in second. Of course, Leclerc has took pole here twice before. We definitely have to keep an eye on him when it comes to the fight for pole. And then Red Bull will be, second best team. Max Verstappen third, Sergio Perez in fourth place. I mean, a second row lockout wouldn't necessarily be the end of the world for Red Bull, because you'd expect Red Bull to be quite a bit quicker than Ferrari in the race. So, yeah, third and fourth is what I've gone for Red Bull. Fifth and sixth, the two Mercedes of George Russell and Lewis Hamilton. The reason I've gone Russell ahead of Hamilton is because at the minute, Russell just looks quicker than Lewis Hamilton. And then I've gone Fernando Alonso just behind in seventh, Lando Norris in eighth, Oscar Piastri ninth in the unupdated McLaren, and completing the top 10, Nico Hülkenberg for Haas. Of course, he's had a great record getting into the top 10 this season, and Haas do look genuinely pretty quick, especially considering in my weekend preview I said I was pretty confident they would have the worst car here. So yeah, looking good for Haas. But that is my predictions for qualifying. Let me know in the live chat whether you agree or disagree, and whether you think Ferrari can get pole position for the Singapore Grand Prix. I'll just quickly go back to this, and in a moment, I am going to bring up on screen the upgrades for this weekend's Singapore Grand Prix, and I will be showing some pictures of some of the new upgrades as well, just so you guys can fully understand what has changed. So, let me just get this up on screen. So we'll start with Red Bull Racing. Of course, credit to Albert Fabrega for reporting this. Brilliant journalist he is. So let's get into these upgrades. Yeah, so Red Bull have got a new floor edge and rear wing end plate. Not sure if there's any pictures of that so far. I will have a look in a moment. But yeah, Red Bull did say they were going to be bringing an upgrade to this race. And it's a decent-sized upgrade, but I don't think it's anything massive. But it should, theoretically, make their car quicker. Max, I think, ran the new floor in practice 1, and then Perez ran the new floor in practice 2. Of course, they reported those issues with the car, so maybe this new upgrade has upset the balance of the car. We'll have to see truly in qualifying whether that is the case. Ferrari have got a new front wing, and it says a reprofiled front wing flap, so just a small upgrade there to the front wing. Mercedes, theirs is circuit specific, so no new performance upgrades for the silver arrows. And Alpine have got a couple big ones, a new side pod inlet and cooling louvers. The side pod inlet, it says raised and staggered side pod inlet, along with increased undercut and revised mirror housing stay and winglets. Yeah, with the side pod inlet, which there is pictures of, I will show in a moment, it does look a bit similar to the revised Red Bull side pod inlet that we saw in Hungary, where they made it a bit tighter in that area. So, yeah, we'll get into that soon enough. Let's get into the other teams, though. As here we go. Look at that. And look at the diagram, by the way. They've just circled the entire car pretty much for McLaren. That is how many upgrades they have brought for this weekend. It is basically, and of course, only Lando Norris is running the new upgrade, but it is basically a new car for the team. Similar to what we saw in terms of size of upgrade back in, what was it, Austria. And then there was a couple parts later, wasn't there, at Silverstone. So, these are the upgrades: front wing end plate, side pod inlet, halo, floor body, coke/engine cover, rear corner, rear suspension, and rear wing end plate, and a beam wing, but that is just circuit specific for drag. So then we'll just go through a bit more detail with these upgrades. So for the front wing end plate, just new end plate geometry, new side pod inlet shape, new halo furniture, fully revised floor. There is a picture of that I've just seen, which I'll show in a moment. It's just a new shape for the floor. Reshaped side pod and engine cover, of course, to go with the revised floor. The teams have to do that with these cars. Modified rear toe link shroud and updated rear wing end plate geometry. Yeah, this is one of the biggest upgrades we've seen this season. But again, we sadly so far have not seen quite enough evidence that it has given them a big performance boost. I really hope, though, that it does at some point, whether it's, this weekend, next weekend, or wherever, because this, these amount of upgrades, this should give them really another half a second, given, the amount of new upgrades they've brought. This is, something quite big. I mean, remember back to Williams, back in Canada, they brought, so many new parts, just like McLaren have. And of course, we saw then how it transformed their season even more. And of course, McLaren, they've had their season transformed once already. So, yeah, really hope it can work for them. Alfa Romeo have got 4 new upgrades: floor fences, diffuser, rear corner, front wing, updated front wing flaps, redesigned rear brake duct geometry, as well as realigned, I think that says, or redesigned, does it say? I can't remember. Can't quite see that quite clearly from where I'm looking. Suspension covers, diffuser, updated diffuser expansion, and floor fences, redesigned floor fences and floor geometry. Of course, Alfa Romeo just a point behind Haas in the championship, so they do need to keep developing if they're going to get up to 8th. Just one new upgrade for Aston Martin, new rear corner, just a small one there for them. And then AlphaTauri, they have brought quite a few upgrades and completely redesigned side pod / floor. You can see they've got a new floor body, floor edge, diffuser, coke / engine cover, rear suspension, rear corner, and rear view mirrors as well. For the floor body, it says relative to the baseline geometry, the rear central floor has been modified. For the floor edge, it says relative to the baseline geometry, the floor edge local to the trailing edge of the forward floor fences has been modified. The rear floor edge and the floor edge wing have also been revised. The diffuser, relative to the baseline geometry, the diffuser sidewall cutout has been what does that say? Can't quite see it from here. The writing is quite small. It's quite a challenge for me to read it. Something, I think re-optimized to suit the new rear floor edge design. Side pod inlet, relative to the baseline geometry, the side pod inlet has been reshaped. Coke / engine cover, the outboard bodywork has been modified. An additional cooling exit has also been added to the inboard engine cover local to the rear lower wishbone forward leg. So yeah, for AlphaTauri, a massive upgrade once again. And so far, I mean, we haven't seen evidence that it's made them worse necessarily, but yeah, we haven't quite seen a massive gain from them. So I guess we'll see in qualifying and just going forward in general how it will work for them. And finally, Williams, but their upgrade is circuit specific, new front wing. So there you go. Those are the official list, FIA list of upgrades. Now let's get into some pictures. So here you go. Here is the new McLaren floor. So on the bottom, you can see the old floor and its design. On the top, you can see the new one. So now it's a lot straighter, neater, you could argue. And it's just, yeah, not a massive redesign, but you can see with where these hands are pointing compared to here on the bottom that it is definitely redesigned from its original here on the bottom, which I think this on the bottom, this floor design they had, I think, debuted in Austria. So, yeah, they're just constantly updating this, I guess, floor / side pod concept for their car. So, yeah, big upgrade for McLaren. Of course, with these ground effect cars, the floor is the most important area. Here is the new AlphaTauri side pod. So in the bottom here, you can see the old one. And at the top, you can see my mouse. It's a lot just straighter, flatter. But on the top here, it kind of, I mean, towards the bottom, it kind of, you know, is Red Bull similar. But at the top here, where this top hand is, it kind of is similar to the Ferrari side pod that we've seen, you know, from last year and even the first bit of this year. So it's an interesting design. It's not quite what I expected. I expected it to basically just be a Red Bull carbon copy. But yeah, an interesting one. And we'll see whether this unique side pod, whether it can give them some, you know, a big dose of extra performance. But yeah, I was surprised to see that because I thought it just would have been, again, really just a copy of the Red Bull, given that so many teams have basically done that. We've got here with the Alpine, I think you can kind of see the side pod inlet comparison. You can see the new one here on the bottom. Again, you can see a difference in the shape of the inlet around this area here on the top compared to this area on the bottom. There is a difference, but there is actually, I think, another picture out there that shows it off in a better way. Yeah, this one. You can see, so on the bottom here, you can see the inlet here of the side pod, which is definitely more open than the one on the top. And the one on the top looks a lot more similar to me to the new side pod inlet that Red Bull debuted in Hungary, which would have been what, like 2 months ago, I think, almost 2 months ago at this point. So yeah, this is, I would probably say, Alpine's biggest upgrade, arguably, of the season. They've not really brought that many upgrades, I have to say, Alpine, during 2023, even though, you know, they're not limited in wind tunnel time. They've got, I think, more than the top teams and nearly the same as the bottom teams. They're smack bang in the middle of teams that, you know, have whatever time in the wind tunnel. Is there any others? I think a slight one there for the mirrors of the Alpine. Is there anything else? Let me just look and make sure. And no, don't think there is. So, those are the new upgrades, guys. McLaren, big upgrade. Alfa Romeo, bit of a big upgrade as well for them, especially considering, you know, they don't have exactly the biggest budget in the world to develop their car. AlphaTauri as well, going for quite an interesting and big upgrade. We'll see how that affects those teams' performances in qualifying, and we'll see whether my predictions for qualifying do turn out to be correct. But guys, now, quickly, before I get into the teams in a bit more depth and I go into, you know, how I think truly they will get on in tomorrow's qualifying session, let me just quickly remind you, if you are new to the channel, to subscribe. Because, of course, we are, you know, doing constant, or not constant, but we're doing plenty of live streams and content on this channel. And this is a great place for constant updates with all of the goings on in Formula One. So if you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. We do qualifying, race watch-alongs, practice watch-alongs at times, previews, reviews, all of that stuff. Yeah, make sure to subscribe for more content like this. And here is a look at my next 2 pieces of content. So tomorrow, by the way, sorry about the noise in the background. It's my creaking chair. Quite loud these days. Yeah, tomorrow I will be live from 10:15 a.m. UK time for the Practice 3 and qualifying watch-along for the Singapore Grand Prix. Again, live from 10:15 a.m. all the way through till 3:30 p.m. And then on Sunday, I will be live at 11 a.m. UK time. That's 2 hours, of course, before the race starts, as usual for me. And I'll be doing, obviously, the race preview to begin with, and then we'll be getting into the race watch-along itself, and a bit of a reaction afterwards as well. So make sure to join for that. There won't be a review of the Singapore weekend on Monday, because of course we are doing a back-to-back, because obviously next week is the Japanese Grand Prix. So once we're done with, you know, tomorrow and Sunday, the next piece of content will then be Thursday, getting into previewing the Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka. And for everyone watching right now, make sure to smash the like button, because we're only on 12 likes. Let's try and get those likes up. We can definitely get quite a few more likes than that. So let's try and get up to 20 plus if we can in the next few minutes or so. But also, you know, smashing the like button, it does help my channel grow. And it does, what do you call it? It does help me see that you guys actually enjoy the content. So make sure to smash the like button if you have not already. But one thing I am going to do quickly, actually, before we get into the front running teams, I'm just going to quickly blow my nose because I'm a bit stuffy tonight. Then we'll get into these teams. So just give me a second, guys. Yeah, there you go. That should be okay, at least for the next few minutes. And yeah, what we'll do is we'll go through these top teams, and then I'll come to you guys in the live chat. So make sure to keep posting your comments, because I will get to them soon enough. Anyway, let's get into it, and let's start with, yeah, Red Bull Racing, who are not looking good. Rear instability, something we have not heard from Red Bull, again, since the start of 2020. Their cars have been basically perfect in terms of handling for the last 2-3 years. It's very weird to hear of actual issues with the car. So, yeah, it's been an unusual day for them. It's been by far their worst day of Friday practice so far this season. Even though, yeah, they're not going to be 7th and 8th in qualifying. I think everybody knows that. Even Red Bull know that. With those issues they've got, they are not favourites to take pole position. And if they can't get a car onto the front row, winning the race is going to be very hard. Because, I mean, if you look at the record here in Singapore, drivers who have won the Singapore Grand Prix, excluding, of course, 2008, which was the Crashgate race where Alonso won from, I think, 15th or 16th on the grid. You exclude that, almost every winner of this race has started on the front row. I'm trying to think the people who didn't start on pole who actually won this race. You had Sebastian Vettel in 2012 started 3rd. But Hamilton and Maldonado on the front row that weekend both retired from the race. So, not like he overtook them necessarily to win that race. I'm trying to think where else. 2017, Hamilton did win from 5th, but we had, 3 cars took out on the first corner. And then Hamilton got past, 1 car. Ended up, getting through all that chaos, which I think was Daniel Ricciardo. And and then went into the lead. So, again, context does matter when it comes to that. And then 2018, the winner was on pole. 2019, I think Sebastian Vettel started third, but he had a massive undercut, which really was the reason why he won that race. Of course, that was his last F1 win. And then last year, Sergio Perez won from second on the grid. So, yeah, most of the time, say 75-80% of the time, if you win the Singapore Grand Prix, you have to start on pole position. So, if they can't get on the front row, it's going to be a really tough effort, one, to win the race, but also it will be very exciting for us to see, right, now they've got a proper challenge on their hands. Let's see how they somehow still end up winning the race. Maybe it'll be Ferrari incompetence that causes it. Who knows if that was to happen where Ferrari lock out the front row, but it sure would make for a very interesting and exciting race Sunday if Red Bull did not have a car on the front row for this Singapore Grand Prix. So, yeah, I think at best at the minute, I can see a Red Bull on the front row because, I mean, Sainz and Leclerc are not exactly the most consistent drivers in Formula One. We know that they both can be not error prone, but they're not exactly as consistent as Max Verstappen is. So, that is something we have to factor in for qualifying tomorrow. And we know the Ferrari car, even though it's looked good so far, it still can be fundamentally quite hard to handle at times. So I can see Red Bull getting on the front row, but as of present, I don't see them on pole position. I just don't. I think they've got legitimate issues, and I think given how big the issues were for them today, it's really going to take a lot, I think, for them to fix them to the point where they end up taking pole position. I mean, they are such a great team. Maybe that is what they'll do anyway, but I think this time, I think they, I don't think they'll be able to just, work wonders quite that much to be able to turn around the handling of the car completely into a position where it's, handling superbly well. And we do know with Red Bull that I wouldn't say setup for them is, setup for everybody, car setup is important. Let's get that straight. But I think for them, setting the car up for the race is a big reason why, well, not a big reason, but it's definitely a reason why they've been so dominant this season, especially in the races. Because of the dominant advantage they've had, they've been able to not necessarily set the car up to optimize qualifying and been able then to, even if they've not started on pole, still win the race by a country mile. So it is very important to Red Bull, the setup, because if they can't get it set up in a way that can fully optimize their performance in the race, like they have done so many times this season, then even if Ferrari are overworking their tyres on Sunday, it's going to make things quite difficult if Red Bull have not quite got the car setup they ideally need to punish Ferrari for, that issue. So it's going to be intriguing to see tomorrow how Red Bull combat this issue and whether in practice 3 they can get out there and have a lot more confidence with the car compared to today, and whether, of course, they'll be able, if they can develop that confidence, to, how close they can get to Ferrari, or possibly even beat the Ferrari team in qualifying. The last thing I will say on Red Bull is I do expect them to, or not them, I do expect Max Verstappen still to be ahead of Sergio Perez. I know Perez was ahead of Verstappen in practice too, but yeah, I'm pretty confident that Max Verstappen will be quicker than Perez. Of course, important to remember in practice too, Perez ran the new floor and Max ran the old one. So that does kind of skew their performances in that second practice session. But yeah, Max Verstappen, I expect to be the number one still in qualifying for Red Bull. But in by no means is it going to be easy for the Red Bull team. They're going to have to work super hard overnight, and tomorrow we're going to get pole position here in Singapore for the first time since, I think, 2013 was the last time they had pole position in Singapore. Yeah, it was 2013, 10 years ago, the last pole position at the Marina Bay circuit. Of course, they won here last year, but pole position, really, if you're going to win here, it is really what you need to be getting, because it's just such a secure position to have, for the race. I mean, we've seen it at so many street circuits, not just Singapore, but, Monaco being another one. I think Baku to a degree. Actually, no, Baku, the record for pole position there is not good. What am I talking about? But you get what I mean. For street circuits, you've got to be on pole, really, if you're going to give yourself a really good chance of winning. And it's going to be quite an effort to get that for Red Bull this weekend. Anyway, let's move forward. And before we get into their main contenders for that position, let's touch on Mercedes, who I guess are contenders for pole position or the top positions. But I don't really, mentally, I don't really figure them into that battle. The way I see it is the battle for pole is Ferrari versus Red Bull. I don't really factor Mercedes in, because I just don't think for the overall lap, Mercedes have got enough of a car to compete with Ferrari and eventually, once Red Bull show their true pace, Red Bull as well. So, yeah, third best team is what I see. I don't think they'll be that far away, though, from pole position, and even Red Bull, if they are the second best team. I don't think they'll be that far away. It will still be close. It will still be competitive. But ultimately, Mercedes, yeah, I think will be the third strongest team, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Their race pace does look very strong. So, yeah, it's not exactly the end of the world for Mercedes if they can only get at best, I don't know, fourth place. But, yeah, I would love to sit here and say Mercedes can get pole and, they could absolutely win this race this weekend. But I don't think they've got enough there. And I think qualifying, in the end, will cost them the opportunity be able to win the race, because if they were to get pole position somehow, given their long run pace they've shown so far, they'd have a pretty good chance of holding on to win the race, put it that way. But yeah, I just don't think the pace is there. I think they're missing just 2 to 3 tenths of a second too much, in my view, for them to be able to get pole position. So yeah, sad to say, but that's what I think the reality is for them. George Russell looking quicker than Lewis Hamilton. Good to see from Russell, at least, that he's in better form, and he is, well, in form at the minute. There is no doubt about it. Ever since the summer break finished, he has been back really to his best, has George Russell. So great to see. Lewis Hamilton was a bit dismayed at times in practice about the amount of time he was losing to certain other drivers, but he seems satisfied, I would say, with how Mercedes are performing. But I wouldn't say Lewis is necessarily satisfied with how he is performing compared to George Russell. But of course, it's only practice, so we'll see in qualifying what really happens. But yeah, I think, if they can get at minimum a third row lockout, I think that would be not a great result. It wouldn't be anything to celebrate over, but it would be a solid result, given how most likely their pace will be relative to Ferrari, Red Bull, Martin and McLaren as well. So, yeah, third row lockout, that's what I think they'll get, with Russell ahead of Hamilton. Let's see if they can maybe be even better than that. That would be fantastic to see. 3 top teams going at it for pole position. That's what we want. But thankfully, we've at least got another team fighting Red Bull for pole this weekend, and it quite clearly is the Scuderia Ferrari team. I did not expect this at all. I thought they would be maybe not as bad as maybe I thought a few months ago, given where they were at times. But I did not see, coming here, I did not see this happening. A 1-2 in all of the practice sessions so far for the team. That was just not... I just didn't even view it as possible. I thought, no, there's just no way that they're going to be that quick. And yeah, they have been that quick. And not only that quick, but there's a comfortable gap for them so far over the rest of the teams, which is quite incredible to see and to say as well. Carlos Sainz, I have to give a special word to him. Good to see him in such good form. Clearly, that performance at Monza has clicked something in his mind, because he's now back to performing at his very best that we saw 2 to 3 years ago. So that is great to see. And he's looking very much one of the favourites for pole position, and it would be great to see him on pole yet again for another F1 race, because normally the races where he starts on pole do tend to be quite exciting. So yeah, Ferrari are looking fantastic. The fight between Leclerc and Sainz, I think, is going to be very interesting indeed. Of course, Leclerc has taken pole position in 75% of the Singapore Grand Prix he has competed in. 2 of 3. Yeah, just an incredible, record for Leclerc. Is it 2 of 3? I'm trying to think. Is it 2 of 3? Yeah, I think the percentage I might have got wrong, actually. I don't think it's 75%, but you know what I mean. It's 2 pole positions in 3 races. It's a really good record. Yeah, that little fight, though, between Sainz and Leclerc is going to be really, really interesting, because Carlos, if you remember, back to when he was, racing for teams like McLaren and Toro Rosso, he would always be super quick around this track. Remember for Toro Rosso once, I think he qualified 6th in, was it 6th? In 2016? Let me just have a quick look. Make sure I'm not lying. But, yeah. I'm pretty sure he did. Let's just have a quick look. And, yeah. 2016 for Toro Rosso was in 6th place on the grid. And he was, only 1 year in to, I think, his Formula 1 career. And even in his debut season around here, he finished in the top 10, even though he started outside of the top 10. So he's always been, point is, very, very strong here. And this is going to be definitely one of his strongest Grand Prix events, I think. Even though, saying that, I did have him in my qualifying prediction of last night, quite low down and 0.2 of a second slower than Leclerc. The reason I predicted that, though, was because I looked at last year's, pace difference between the two, and Leclerc was quite a bit quicker than Carlos. But from what we've seen so far this weekend, Carlos has improved on that blip from last year's Singapore Grand Prix, which is great to see. But yeah, Ferrari, for all of all parts of the track, they've got a great car, and arguably have got the best car in every single sector, which is definitely not something I expected to say at this point of the weekend. But can they deliver on it? I think they will. I think at least they'll get pole position. Maybe saying they'll get the front row locked out is a bit ambitious, but I am willing to be ambitious, given what I have seen so far. And, the data I've seen, I am willing to be ambitious with that prediction. Let me know in the chat. And also in the poll running at the top of the chat. Do you think they can do it? Do you think they can get pole position? And let me know if you think they can lock out the front row. Let me know, if you do think that. Sorry, if you do think that. Because, let's... I don't think there's anything wrong with being, say, ambitious predictions. I mean, yeah, sometimes they can be hilariously wrong. I've been quite wrong on some things predictions-wise in, the past. So, yeah, let's see whether, at least for me, predicting a front row lockout for Ferrari will backfire. Given that it's Ferrari, there is a chance definitely it could backfire, but from what I've seen so far, I'm pretty confident on this one. So don't let me down, Ferrari, please don't let me down. Because one thing I would hate after doing all of this is Red Bull to take the front row by about half a second. That would be incredibly embarrassing. Anyway, let's now touch on Aston Martin. They don't look as competitive as I hoped, but I can't really say I'm massively surprised with how they're performing. Alonso, his performance looks decent. I think he's doing the best he can. I don't think you can ask any more of Fernando so far this weekend. I think the Aston Martin genuinely is just not one of the top 3 quickest cars here, at least in quali conditions. I just don't think they've got a good enough car to be definitely top 5, and I think even getting on just about to the 3rd row of the grid is going to be, in 6th place would be a struggle. But yeah, that's why I've gone with Fernando Alonso 7th for Aston Martin. I believe Aston Martin have got the 4th best car here. Lance Stroll is not making the top 10. There's just absolutely no way. We saw with practice, Lance was, I think nearly a second slower than his teammate. Was it? Let me have a quick look again. Alonso, 3.5 tenths off. And yeah, about 9 tenths of a second slower. That is horrendous. And if you are 9 tenths of a second slower than your teammate, even if you're in the Red Bull, you're not going to make Q3 because qualifying here in Singapore has always been really close. So yeah, Lance Stroll, no chance of Q3. Best I can see is a 13th, 14th place in Q2 as his hopeless season continues. But yeah, if Alonso can get himself onto the 3rd row, maybe then gives himself a outside chance of a podium. But I'd really, at this point, I'm struggling to see Aston Martin getting a podium given the performance shown so far. And finally, we will go on to McLaren. And yeah, those upgrades, so many upgrades, probably the biggest upgrade we've seen this season. It hasn't shown anything so far of benefit. So yeah, we'll have to find out tomorrow what their upgrade genuinely, has given them. Because given the size of the upgrade and the purpose of the upgrade, or upgrades, whatever you want to call it, if it doesn't show any benefit here, then it's probably not going to show any benefit for the rest of the season. This is one of the tracks where the benefit from an upgrade will show. I remember, don't know if you guys remember this, but when Ferrari last won this race in 2019, coming into the weekend, I thought Ferrari would be pretty slow. They then brought a massive upgrade, which was a new front wing, new floor, new side pod even, I think, possibly. And their pace improved by, I think, like a second per lap. It was a dramatic increase in pace, and that's why they got pole and ended up getting a 1-2 finish. I'm not saying McLaren need to gain as much performance as that. If they did gain as much performance as that, McLaren would probably be, not looking out the front row because Piastri doesn't have the upgrade, but Norris would definitely be on pole if that type of gain came with the upgrade. But they definitely need to gain from the upgrade at least half a second around a track like this. So, yeah, I think for McLaren, the prediction I've gone for of 8th and 9th, it's based off of what we've seen so far. That's why I've made that prediction. But really, given where I expected them to be coming into the weekend, they need to be top 3, top 4 on the grid. No worse than that. If they're 5th, 6th, 7th, then that is a very disappointing qualifying session and just weekend in general here in Singapore. So, yeah, tomorrow is a massive day because if they can show this gigantic improvement and maybe even take pole position by a good amount lap time, that's a game changer for the rest of the season. That could see them being able to actually fight Red Bull legitimately for a few races to the end of the season. Because, you know, Red Bull are faster than McLaren at the minute, but then the gap's not, you know, a second. Probably more like, say, I don't know, 6, 7 tenths of a second, probably. Maybe half a second. Being the smallest gap between the two teams in, say, race conditions. So, you know, if they were to gain, say, 5, 6 tenths of a second from this upgrade compared to Red Bull and where they're at, then, yeah, the McLaren would be in a position to absolutely win not just one race, but maybe 2 or 3 races in total before the end of the year. So, tomorrow is a massive day. It really, really is. Because if McLaren, if they can start getting into a position where they could start winning races, maybe even win a couple, then them climbing up the championship and finishing higher than 5th is very much possible. Very much possible. So, yeah, we will see tomorrow legitimately where McLaren are at. Because I do have a feeling today that we didn't quite see the maximum from them. So we'll find out tomorrow. It should be very intriguing to see where McLaren really are. Anyway, let's go back to these pictures. And let's now come to your comments in the chat. Make sure to keep posting them. And I'll read out as many as I can before we go on to the rest of the teams. Right. Willifon Gaming says Ferrari long runs weren't great. I don't think. Yeah, it's not been. I think it's been about 5-6 years the last time Ferrari had good long run pace. To be honest, I mean, you could argue at the start of 2022. Yeah, you could argue at the start of 2022 that they had good long run pace, but yeah, it's been an issue for the past few years. I've just seen some news, which is interesting. It's F1 news, I guess. But, what is it? A current F1 driver will compete in the 24-hour of Daytona next January for WTR Andretti. Team owner Wayne Taylor did not specify who it will be, although the name should be revealed later this year. Let me know in the chat who you think that driver is. It's probably going to be Kevin Magnussen, I'd imagine. Because, of course, he's, I think, hasn't he done the Daytona before? Or he's done that type of, like, sports car stuff? I think it is. Yeah. That's interesting news. What was I going on Twitter to look for? Oh, yeah. Let me just... That was what I was going to look for. I was going to just quickly have a quick look at the long run pace. So, if I can do that. And I'm not going to just full on reveal it all because I want to kind of like, you know, feel it on Sunday. But let me just have a quick look. So yeah, wait, hold on, is this the right one? No, that's the wrong one. Hold on. Just find the correct graphic. Right, here you go. So, yeah, Ferrari's pace it's not too bad, but they look, at the minute, they don't look quite as strong as Red Bull, or as strong as Aston Martin, or McLaren, but their pace compared to Mercedes is pretty decent. So, it's not as bad as you would expect, put it that way. Of course, we'll find out Sunday for real. Greg Martinez says quality predictions: Leclerc, Verstappen, Sainz, Checo, and then race prediction: Checo, Max, Sainz. Yeah, Perez winning again would be very much a surprise. Will F1 Gaming says Logan has a shocker every weekend. Yeah, pretty much at this point. Blue Flag Alpha says, is Red Bull struggling for once this year? Yeah, this could be the first real struggle of a weekend they've, well, had all this year. Yeah, it's, what do you call it? Yeah, what was I going to say? Sorry, something just caught my attention on Twitter. Yeah, it not even just this year, but if you look back in 2022, I mean, did they really have any like bad Friday practice days? Not that I can really remember that were like that they had to like rescue the weekend or anything. Sparky Pete says Red Bull can start P8 and win. Looking at what normally happens here is wrong. Red Bull car is historically great, top 2 of all time. Red Bull outliers. I disagree with that. I don't think it's quite that much of an outlier. If they had the pace advantage of like a 92 Williams, which was like, well, not even a second, it was well over that, then I would agree with you. But yeah, I don't think the pace advantage is that big. Grandmaster Yoda says Red Bull was close in FP1. If they can get back 10th of a second difference, they win the race. Race pace are 7/10 of a second faster. Ferrari deg is too big. Sparky Pete says Russell damn near bent it in the wall last corner to edge Lewis out. Outside that, Lewis was faster. George did his time with higher track evolution. Yeah. Well, he did, but it was only slightly better. Slightly higher track evolution. It's not a gigantic difference. Telephone Gaming saying Sainz finished 4th in Singapore. Yeah, 2017 was a brilliant drive. I think that was almost wasn't his final race for Toro Rosso. I think that was the couple races after. Yeah, that was a send off for his Toro Rosso career, which was pretty impressive looking back. I don't think he gets enough credit for what he did at Toro Rosso. And I think the reason that is because it's Max Verstappen, who was his teammate for the first year and a half of his F1 career, was just so much more impressive. I think if Max Verstappen had never existed, I think Carlos Sainz, his time at Toro Rosso, would be looked back on a lot better than it is. Which is, I wouldn't say necessarily fair to Carlos, because Max Verstappen is an outlier. He's not just, another quick driver. He's, one of the best top few we've ever seen of all time. So, especially in terms of talent. So, yeah. Anyway, let me move on to the rest of the teams, and then we'll get to the results of that poll soon enough. Let's just hold on. Yeah, let's now go on to Alpine, who look absolutely terrible so far. What I want to check though quickly, and I may as well do it now because I didn't have time to do it before the stream, unfortunately. I just want to check to see if both drivers were running the new upgrade. And that's not why there was a big difference between the two in practice too. I can't see anything in terms of who was running what part. So, yeah. For Esteban Ocon to only be 13th and Pierre Gasly to be so far down and nearly half a second slower than Ocon, even though Gasly previously has been very fast here, is baffling. I think that's the only really the best way to put it. Alpine, their pace is absolutely baffling. We've seen so many times this year at street circuits or just higher aero tracks they tend to be quite a bit stronger. We even saw that a couple of weeks ago in Zandvoort, where they were obviously on the podium, and their pace in the race was actually quite good. But yeah, this weekend we haven't seen anything at all. They look like they've got one of the slowest cars this weekend, which is something I didn't think I'd be saying about Alpine really at any Grand Prix weekend. I mean, of course at the last race at Monza, they ended up being the slowest team, and I kind of predicted it that they would be the slowest team and one of the slowest teams. But what I'm referencing to when I say that I wasn't expecting to say that was, let's go back to where we were at the end of May in Monaco. On the podium, they were mixing it with the big boys. They were just as quick, if not quicker, than Mercedes. They were way quicker than McLaren. Arguably quicker than Ferrari at times. They were properly mixing it with those teams. There is no doubt about that. And now, I mean, they're doing well just to get into the top 10. It's just it's so incredible to me, this drop-off from Alpine. And for me, the reason is because they've not brought enough upgrades. They've brought too many small adjustments, which is it's not good enough. Because, I mean, look at McLaren, for example, with the big upgrade they've just brought. And of course, we haven't seen yet any evidence that upgrade has improved their pace. But even though McLaren's pace improved a lot with that big upgrade back in Austria, McLaren still were like, we need to get better still. We need to get better still. Let's bring, a load more parts and make, another jump up the field and absolutely maximize our 2023. But Alpine, it's almost like arrogance in a way that they just think their car is that good that it doesn't need, mass amounts of updates during the year. Because, I mean, we've gone through this year in every single race weekend, as you guys know, we've gone through upgrades for the teams. Alpine have got to be one of the teams that have brought the least amount of performance upgrades during this season. That's not good enough. That's not good enough, especially for a team that got into a position of being on the podium in Monaco. And were, around that time, they looked like they had transitioned into being a front-running Formula One team for a couple races. It's just not good enough. I think what I should do, actually, talking about that, who has brought the most amount of performance upgrades, I should actually do a calculation at the end of the year of who has brought in total, the most performance upgrades, just to see, who has not necessarily tried the hardest. I don't think that's a fair way to say it, but just to see who felt the need to update their car the most during the season for whatever reason. And then we can get into, if I was to come up with that table, we can then get into the reasons why for each team they've brought the amount of upgrades they did. So, yeah, I should probably do that, because I think if I was to do the calculations, I think there's a good chance Alpine would be probably one of the bottom 2-3 teams in terms of amount of performance upgrades brought to the car, which again is not good enough as far as I'm concerned. It's not like Alpine won the championship last year, therefore they have the least amount of wind tunnel time allowed to them. They have, I think, 20% more wind tunnel time than Mercedes do at the minute, and have done. They've had, that extra 20% wind tunnel time since the end of June, but we still haven't seen anything that big. I mean, even though earlier I said their sidepod inlet upgrade was probably their biggest upgrade of the season, it's still not that big of an upgrade. It's a decently sized upgrade, but it's nothing gigantic. It's not going to give them an extra half a second or anything. So, yeah, it's so disappointing to me with this team. Going forward, I have no hope for this team, really. I think really at this point, and it's tough to say this, but I think they are at this point, they're a waste of a team. Because no matter how hard they try, they're just too incompetent to be able to actually make any progress. They've been smack bang in the middle of the field since 2017 and have never really made any progress. Yeah, they've had the occasional year where they finish fourth, but then immediately they'll drop back to fifth or sixth. It's just, what is the point of this team other than to sell more Alpine cars or Renault cars, whatever the fuck? You see what I mean? It's just, I just don't get what the point of this team is anymore, especially with the sheer amount of money they've spent. I'm pretty sure they've spent well over €1 billion on this whole project in the last few years. And Renault, and this is what's funny. Obviously, they took over the Lotus team, who they had their final season as Lotus in 2015. Renault at the minute, or Alpine, are just as good as Lotus were in 2015. And that's probably been the best Renault / Alpine have got to with their F1 project since 2016 is basically the same as what Lotus were in 2015. Some solid midfield results, a couple surprisingly strong results, and a podium, but nothing major. No. I mean, yeah, they had the race win in Hungary, but it was so fortunate, that race win. So many things had to go their way for that to happen. Yeah, it's just, I'm fed up with this team, basically. I feel sorry for the drivers because they've got no hope with this team they're racing for. And if I was Gasly or Ocon's agent, I'd be telling them to get the hell out of there, to be honest. Yeah, so what do you call it? With Alpine, they're not going to get into the top 10. They're a bit slow. Maybe at best they get both cars into Q2, but other than that, I don't really know what they'll do. And to be honest, given that this team has proven they'll make no progress, no matter how hard they try, how much money they put in, no matter how much resources they have, I don't think I care really that much what they do for the future either. Williams, again, it's hard to get a read on them exactly in terms of where they are. Alex Albon was a second, I think, quicker than Logan Sargent in practice 1. So, if Albon had done a proper session in practice 2, then he probably could have gone, say between Lawson and Ocon, maybe ahead of Lawson if he was a slight bit quicker. So yeah, I think Williams have got a decent pace, but it's not, it's not pace that's good enough to see them in the top 10. Absolutely no way are they going to be in the top 10 with that car. So yeah, Williams are about where I expected them to be coming into the weekend. Say 7th or 8th best team, which is not really that bad. This is going to be one of their weaker tracks. Next week at Suzuka, I expect them to be very quick. So yeah, I don't think that's really a problem for Williams. Let me know though, guys, in the chat, what do you think of their special livery, the special Golf livery? I don't really like it. I think the blue is too light. I'd like it if it was a bit darker, to be honest. I think it would work better. But, I don't mind seeing special liveries, but yeah, it's not that great. It's not that great in my view. Let me just have a quick look, though, to see. Let me just have a quick look to see what Alex Albon's problem was in practice 2. Hopefully nothing bad. Right, he had an ERS issue. Hopefully gets that fixed for tomorrow. Of course, ERS issue is... If you don't have ERS, then there's no point running. I mean, you can run without ERS on track. You're not going to break down, but well, you can break down if you have a proper failure. But if there are circumstances where you can have no ERS and still drive around, but there's no point really because you'll be so far off the pace that there's no point whatsoever. So yeah, hopefully gets that fixed for tomorrow because definitely he is Williams' hope for any positive results this weekend and in general going forward as long as Logan Sargent is his teammate. RSF1, the only team not to bring any upgrade to this Grand Prix, whether that upgrade be performance or circuit specific. They do have a massive upgrade coming for their home race in Texas, but yeah, at the minute, still fundamentally the same car we saw basically at the start of the season. I think the only difference being a new front wing that they brought at Zandvoort 3 weeks ago, which I don't think we've really seen any benefits from that, to be honest. So yeah, Haas, they look pretty good actually. Magnussen in 9th, Hulkenberg 11th. That is way better than I expected them to be. And overall for the track, their pace looks on average pretty decent. So yeah, that's why I predicted Hulkenberg to get into the top 10 because his performance in qualifying this year has been very, very good. Very, very consistent. Kevin Magnussen, we know what he's going to do. He's going to, be nowhere in qualifying because he's not been able to hook up the lap in 2023, which is, been really disappointing. But yeah, I think Haas, outside of the top 5 teams, I think they're best of the rest quite clearly. The only team maybe that could challenge them for that are the next team we're going to go on to, who are just a point behind them in the Constructors' Championship. And that is, of course, Alfa Romeo. And yeah, Alfa Romeo don't look too bad. Valtteri Bottas was in 10th. Zhou Guanyu was horrendous. That's all I can say on him, really. He was, 16th and about half a second slower than his teammate, which is, unacceptable. Especially when Zhou has raced here before. It's not like he has that excuse. Yeah, but Bottas looks good. Valtteri has had okay levels of performance around here from the past, from what I remember, but nothing outstanding. So yeah, I'd be surprised if Bottas was to get into the top 10. I think more likely he will end up around a 13th, something like that on the grid. I don't think Alfa Romeo really will get anywhere near the top 10. It's going to take something quite special for that to happen. But saying that, they have brought some upgrades. Maybe that's going to allow them to get a bit closer to those cars in the top 10 on a regular basis. Maybe we'll give them an extra, say, quarter of a second to make that gain in performance. Let's hope they can. Maybe that's why Bottas was in the top 10 today. But yeah, they look decent, but I think realistically, I don't think they're going to be in the top 10. I'd be very much surprised by that. And finally, another team I'd be surprised by if they made the top 10 is AlphaTauri. But again, massive shout out to Liam Lawson. 0.2 of a second quicker than Yuki Tsunoda around a track he's never raced at before. After just, his first day of driving around the track. That is seriously impressive stuff because I cannot emphasize enough how tricky this circuit is. Mentally, physically, and in terms of, testing your driver skill. It is one of the toughest tracks out there. It really is. Might not provide us the most exciting racing, but it is one of the toughest tracks out there. So to be doing that is an absolutely superb effort. Even if he has maybe more of the upgrades on his car than Yuki does, which I don't believe that would be the case because I don't see why AlphaTauri would give him the upgrades over Tsunoda, even just for one session. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Stunning job by Liam Lawson. Let's hope he can deliver on that tomorrow, because if he can, then I think that's basically confirmation, surely, that Red Bull are going to put him in F1 and in that AlphaTauri for next season. So yeah, I think AlphaTauri are looking with Lawson pretty decent. Yuki Tsunoda, I do hope he can show a bit more because we know he's capable of more. Of course, he did have a decent performance here last year for the AlphaTauri team. So yeah, I think there is more to come, definitely from Tsunoda. And of course, now we're racing in Asia, obviously a bit closer to home. And of course, he's got his home race next week. He is, or he should be, a bit more pumped up than usual, racing quite a bit closer to home for him. And of course, there theoretically should be for, you Tsunoda fans, obviously, maybe more Yuki Tsunoda fans at the Singapore Grand Prix just because of, how much closer Japan is compared to, obviously, when we're racing in Europe. So, yeah, Tsunoda I expect to improve, but Liam Lawson, again, massive credit to him. Let's hope he keeps that up. But I think with AlphaTauri, the best I can see is probably them getting one car into Q2 and one car probably just missing out. We'll see who that car is. Or rather, who that driver is that misses out on Q2. So anyway, let's go back to the top here. There you go. And before I head off, let's get into the results of this poll. So, I asked you guys, after a brilliant Friday practice, will Ferrari take pole position for the 2023 Singapore Grand Prix? Initially, you guys were voting quite strongly no, but eventually, after 53 votes, it has turned around and the yes vote has won by 58% to 41% no. Yeah, I believe Ferrari will get pole. My prediction is a front row, but I think definitely pole position they will get and set us up for a bit more of an interesting race this weekend than I thought originally we were going to get, which is great to see if if they can pull off that pole position. Of course, Ferrari have took pole here in Singapore. I think in four of the last Singapore, I think. Hold on, let me just get the calculations right so I don't fuck it up. What? Yeah, I think it's 4 of the last 6 Singapore Grand Prix. Ferrari have been on pole. So they've got a very good record here. And clearly, they are on fire. And, well, they're in fantastic form. So, yeah. Looking great. And let's hope it leads to, an exciting day tomorrow. Just an exciting weekend in general. But thank you guys, of course, for coming for this qualifying preview for the Singapore Grand Prix. Reminder, tomorrow I will be live from 10:15 a.m. UK time for the Practice 3 and qualifying watch along. Make sure to join me for that. Be live until 3:30 p.m. Then on Sunday I'll be live 2 hours before the race starts at 11 a.m. UK time for the race preview and race watch along, and we'll be live all the way until probably 3:30 p.m. ish UK time as well. So yeah, thanks for coming on, guys. If you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Make sure to smash the like button before you go if you haven't already. So let's try and get up to 30 plus likes if we can. If you want to keep up with content on this channel, another great place you can do so, or another great place you can follow me, I guess, literally, is Twitter. If you have a Twitter account or an X account, whatever you want to call it, then yeah, make sure to follow me over there at ChazHD5 is my @ and the account name is ChazHD. So yeah, make sure to go follow me on there. And if you want to join our Discord server that has about 500 members and is a great place for notifications for my videos, streams, and just any channel updates in general, make sure to go join that Discord. There is a link below in the description if you want to join that server. But guys, until qualifying day tomorrow and my qualifying stream beginning at 10:15 a.m. UK time. It has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.